ChessDiagnostic.
Hello everybody, and welcome to day 23 of 28 Days to Better Chess Tactics. So this lesson is going to be the last lesson involving simply tactical puzzles, and I'm going to use the remainder of the days covering tactical games and just simply ideas of how to improve your overall tactical ability. So I would say under master level, or even at the basic master level, your strength is mainly determining how high you go. So if you're an expert, it's normally because you're making less tactical blunders, and a lot of it's simple. This first position is actually a game between Anand and Kramnik, and Kramnik lost. He's black. It's white to move if you want to pause the video, but it's actually a very simple tactic that he just simply missed, and this happens throughout all the levels, but of course it's the main determining factor below master level. So first we're going to look for forcing moves, checks, captures, and threats. The bishop's covering this pawn here on d3, so if we take with the rook, then we get a double attack after queen takes d3, hitting the rook and the knight here. So basically we'll win a rook for two minor pieces. Now, if black tries to make it complicated with queen takes b2, threatening the rook, we can play rook to b1, and if he plays rook to d6, we can just simply take the knight, because after the rook takes, trying to undermine the coverage of this b1 knight, we can actually have an x-ray tactic with rook takes b2. And now the rook takes the queen, and we're simply up a bishop. So the best line, if we go back, would be after rook takes a6, rook takes a6, queen takes d3, and instead of queen takes b2, he would simply play queen to a8, and then we take the knight, and he'd win our passed pawn on a5. So if we traded, we'd be up the two minor pieces, and of course at that level, the super GM level of Anand and Kramnik, it's winning. All right, we're going to move on to position 2 here. In position 2, it's white to move, and you can pause the video now. So just keep in mind that we're on double attack, and you're looking for all the checks, captures, and threats, all the possible forcing moves that make two threats at the same time. And double threat is basically the underlying idea of all tactics, where you make too many threats, the opponent can't defend one of them, and you're going to win based on the position. So in this position, you could see that white is on the attack. The king is a little weak because all of his pieces are just concentrated in the center but inactive. These rooks are inactive. Bishop, dark square is inactive. Black's threatening the queen, so we should keep that in mind. But because of our active pieces, the knight, the bishop, and this rook, we're dominating. So of course we'll look for a rook check, but that doesn't do anything. Knight check, but of course this pawn's covering it. Notice that this pawn is pinned, so keep it in mind, and that should lead you to, go back here, to bishop takes f7. So if we go back all the way here to the beginning, bishop takes f7 makes perfect sense because it removes the defender and also threatens checkmate, as well as this check, the fork of the queen and the king. For example, if the rook takes, which really it has to, we play knight to g6 check, the king moves, and we win the queen for two minor pieces. Now, this is where I want to make a point because this wasn't covered in the puzzle that I examined, but I analyzed it with a computer, but I tried to analyze it all the way till the end before I used a computer. And it looks like you can take the pawn, but you need to be very careful because in positions where you win material, you can sometimes think that there's no dynamic counterplay, but there's always dynamic counterplay, or the possibility, when your opponent still has multiple pieces on the board. So for example, if we play queen takes e5, then knight to g4 is very dangerous. The rook's threatening to take, and he's also hitting the queen. Of course, we can pin with queen to e6, but then he still has knight to f2, and if we take, we get checkmated. So we can't take the knight, and we lose further material. Knight to g1, of course you could just simply take, with the rook, but after rook to d6, the queen has to move back, and we're still winning, but it's a lot harder because we've given away more material than we'd like to. So always keep in mind the dynamic counterplay after the end of the line to evaluate how the opponent can strike back. So the computer recommends queen to f2, keeping your material, pinning this knight for now, and possibly just increasing the pressure. All right, we're going to move on to position 3 now. In position 3, it's white to move, and you can pause the video now. So in this position, this is the last one I'm going to show in this lesson for day 23 for double attack. I tried not to use too famous positions, but this one I couldn't resist just because it's such a perfect example, and that's why it's used everywhere. So white is basically traded a knight for a rook. Of course, this rook's inactive, and black's king is quite weak, but we also have a weak king of our own, with black threatening check on g3 as well as g1 checkmate. There's really nothing we can do other than trying to prevent the checkmate by forcing the rook in the way, because we can't really bring the queen anywhere. For example, if we bring the queen back, we get checkmated here. If we bring the queen to e3, we get checkmated on g2. And so that leaves us with rook to g5. Now, it might seem kind of crazy, but it totally works out in every variation. So once you find this move, rook to g5, you'd have to calculate all the lines. For example, if queen takes g5, then that just took the queen away from defending f7, and now we get knight to f7 checkmate because the pawn's covering this square and the knight's delivering the final check. Now if queen takes e4, we still get knight takes f7 checkmate. So this is where it gets interesting. If the queen takes the pawn, queen takes f6, then we have the shocking move queen to d4. Now, of course, not queen to e5, because the queen would just take with check. Be very careful in these kind of lines when you see these ideas, such as queen to d4, because sometimes you'll miss that there's a check or some other in-between move. So if queen takes d4, then we get knight takes f7 checkmate. If the rook comes up and tries to protect the queen, we can just take it anyway. Because now if the queen takes, we still get knight takes f7 checkmate, and the queen is pinned to the king, so the pawn has to take, leaving the queen undefended. And of course this is winning. So after rook takes g5, instead of rook to g6, here, let's go back here. So queen to d4. If rook takes g5, then of course we'll just take, and then we can stack the pressure on. Eventually with knight to f5, we'll win another exchange back, and we'll be up a queen for a rook. Pretty easy win. So let's go back to the initial position. So you can see by process of elimination, you can figure out the most forcing moves. Of course, this might be difficult to spot in a game, but if you know black's threats, queen to g3, queen to g1, then you're only left with forcing moves. And a lot of times those moves can work in a highly tactical position. And of course, you should always keep an open mind when you're first finding moves. So rook to g5, and then even queen to d4 should pop into your head just because they force black to do something and they bring black away from his weakened king. Alright, so I hope these 3 positions helped you increase your understanding of double attack even just a little bit. In the future lessons, we're going to go through miniatures and games and how to integrate all these tactical positions and your understanding of using a thought process into a game so that you can actually apply it when you're playing a game from the opening, the middle game, and the end game. I'll see you in the future. Hey everybody, thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed this video. Hit the like button, leave a comment, and subscribe for future videos. See you in the future.